Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. Today's the last and the prime time Sunday edition of our the week-long event that we have been having. It's called the Law for the for the Creative Minds, and we've tried to focus on different aspects of law which may be necessary for someone who's creative, who has something that they have created and are very passionate about and want to continue in the time to come. So just give me a thumbs up if you all can hear me and see me clearly. Today's session is going to be an interactive one, and we have with us Mr. Arvind Gopal, and I will add him in this video as soon as he sends me a request to join the live video. Arvind sir, if you're here, you can just send me like a wave or a hi, and I'll try to patch you through. Okay. I hope you all are safe. I hope you all are enjoying your Sunday, spending time with family, loved ones. Tomorrow is Rakhi. And I really hope that, I know it's an important festival and I love Rakhi myself. But I really hope that everyone adheres to social distancing and social distancing norms while they celebrate the festival. Okay, hi, so many waves. Okay, sir has sent me a request. I am going to add him, patch him through. Okay. If you all have any questions during the session, feel free to write them in the comments and I'll ask them, I'll take them up. Good evening, sir.
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
No, thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to this active session.
Oh yes, very interesting subject to always talk about, and it's great fun.
Yes, and also it's not a subject we commonly find in the legal fraternity, in the sense that it's not like that, it's not like CRPC. So I think my first question to you would be, what drove you towards specializing in digital crimes, cyber law, and cyber crimes? Like, what made you go to?
I think it was quite early. I've been a very avid gamer for a very long period of time, um, uh, and tech itself has been extremely fascinating to sort of decipher, understand, see what the nuances are. See what the advent has been. Uh, and when the internet came in the late 90s, in 1998, if I remember correctly. It was just fascinating that you could have a web which was knowledge dominant. It was that there was no boundaries. The limitless potential was just so fascinating and continues to be fascinating, actually. uh, that's exactly why I joined it. I mean, it was just wonderful to see how amazingly creative people can be, and to conceive a completely virtual environment, and thrive in that environment, and also perpetuate other activities into the real-time environment by creating something in the virtual environment. So that was just I'm sure you could probably tell that it still brings a twinkle to my eye, and I get really happy when I talk about tech as such. It's just super fascinating.
Okay, sir. So you spoke about the virtual world and how you can create content in real time on the virtual world. So I think my next question is, what do you think is the correlation between crime in the real world and crime in the virtual world?
Very good question. Thank you for asking that. This is what I repeatedly tell people at multiple forums that I've spoken at, and also when I've been interacting with the government, not only here, everywhere else where I've done matters in, that and law enforcement, most importantly, because that is the linchpin of everything, right? Is that it's no different, because what perpetuates in the real world environment is just that the resources are different, right? A theft is still a theft. You just have to understand those resources and you have to piece it together. It just seems a little confusing because of the technology that creates a barrier when it's actually not a barrier. What one needs to understand is, even in a physical environment, you would, if you don't understand the postal system, for example, you will never understand how a letter would have originated at one end and sort of is disseminated and then reaches the actual receiver, right, when it's sent by a sender. So how about this? Okay, let me paint a very simplistic example that I used in the High Court for some time ago, when I was trying to make the court understand what pop-ups entail, right, and use a very real-time example for it. So I don't know how well aware that you're of pop-ups. Well, pop-ups are essentially whenever you visit websites, for example, right? There are these windows which pop up, which tell you that that this following ad is there, buy this, buy that, and especially malicious websites, they're all over the place, right? They have code which is infused in them, and they're also working at the back end. So let's not get into the complexities too much. But how that is disseminated is that that code is inserted wherever it is into. So all information that is disseminated on the internet is traveling in the form of data packets. So when you send a request, for example, to say a request for a Google like page, right, search page, when you type in google.com or .co.in or whatever it is, what happens is the information will get packed into a little box, for example, and it will get sent to the server. The ISP, which is your internet service provider, will say, oh, this person is asking for this. The credentials will be verified. Your security parameters will be verified. And what then happens is it goes to the Google server, and that recognizes that you're asking for a certain thing. And then that page is sent to you in order for you to carry on and your work, and that's how that happens, right? Now, to explain this and simplify it and explain it, and then there are other complexities about, like I said, there's code infusion that takes place, and that's what is causing the problem, which is that even though you may not have requested a particular ad to crop up and invade your page, it still pops up, right? And that is an invasion in some sense. So whilst it can be used legitimately in the form of ads, because that's what generates money. So the example I used was the postal service. So what happens is, when we take a letter, we write it and we put it into an envelope. What we essentially do is we write a to and a from and address, and then that is sent to a sorting agency, right? That sorting agency is actually your internet service provider, which is telling you where is it that information is meant to go, right? That sorting agency will then send it to another sorting agency, which will disseminate and determine the fact that it needs to reach a particular page. So those are your gateways on the internet, because each gateway will have a security parameter where it says that it's, you have the right to open that door or close it or whatever it is, right? So I use that as an example to show that pop-ups are essentially code which are infused in this transmissive, exercise of the letter being sent from the person who's sending it and the person who's receiving it. And then I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a very famous court case where, pamphlets were being inserted into newspapers, right? And that pamphlet itself was termed to be infringing upon the newspaper. Yeah. So that is the example that I use to piece it all together and say that this is an infringing exercise in this instance, because I am not demanding that particular thing on my page. So when I ask for google.com, I just want to see google.com. I don't want to see 50,000 ads. So yeah, anyway, long story short, this is what I used as an example in the real world. So you have to contextualize it and look at it. And it is very, very important for you to understand the underlying tech where that particular act is perpetuating from. If you don't do that, then it will become very difficult and complex for you to understand.
Okay. So my next question is, now please tell me if you can hear me. One comment.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I hope you can hear me and see me.
Yes. So my next question is, like, for example, what would like when you browse the internet, sometimes you come across criminal content or content that can potentially be criminal, right, in nature. For example, if you see like a cybercrime happening or you're witness to it, so what would be your first step? What would be the following steps that you as a lay person can take if you see something like that?
Okay. So the government has created a singular portal for people to report activities of cybercrime, right? If that can be categorized in that manner. So it's called cybercrime.gov.in, and you can go and there are various web forms that are available where you can report multiple activities. Some in anonymized forms because child pornography is considered to be a very, sort of sensitive subject, right? And it is a very prevalent issue that is being fought around the world. So that is one form of cybercrime that the government is allowed for you to submit complaints even in an anonymized manner. In any case, you can also, in the traditional form of things, go down the FIR and the complaint route. But then, the problem that was persistent even a couple of years ago, when I did multiple things in India, it was that at the ground level and even at policy level, multiple times, the understanding is very limited because the tech and the knowledge regarding tech is not there, right? So they find it very difficult to understand, and then they ask questions such as where is the victim, where is the knife, and questions like that, or where is the wrongful loss, is where is the fraud, how is it perpetuating. So if you have to have those things very clear, so even while reporting, I'm sorry I'm going a little few steps ahead, but that forms a very important part when you're actually complaining. So when you devise and draft a complaint, whether you're submitting it online or in the form of a complaint or an FIR when it gets registered, it's very important to be succinct and be able to encapsulate it in a sort of discernible fashion. Because if you go into the complexities, then it can go into reams and reams and no one's going to bother reading it. So these are the ways of doing it, and those are some of the things that you ought to keep in mind while complaining as well.
Okay. So another question regarding crimes committed using digital resources. So for example, if a crime is committed using like hackers will like hack into the system of a building security system, something of that sort. So what are your views on that? How should that be tackled, and what exactly is it? Because I think there's a lot of there is lack of understanding regarding such aspects of crime.
Yes. Okay. Let's start by saying this. So as tech is evolved, so the first tech crime was committed, by this gentleman who basically infiltrated a system, and he messed around with the clock. So that what happened was, because there was a time limit for people to make free calls in the US, and he messed around with that clock so that people could make free calls beyond that particular limited time period. So it's very ingenious, right? So again, goes back to the first question that you asked. First, you need to be educated about what is it that you're doing on the internet. Every day we're either creating a new account, or we're going and logging into different forums or visiting pages, opening like hundreds of emails a day. As lawyers, we tend to do that, and I'm sure it's the same at your end. The first exercise, simple thing, when you open an email, what is it the first few things that you do? Do you randomly start reading? You start clicking on things? Do you verify the source? Those are things that you need to be educated about, right? Because um, as anyone who's doing it on a regular basis, even someone who's nuanced at times, will fall prey to a lot of things like not noticing the URL and the difference in it. It could only be one letter, right? And that domain could be entirely different. So people need to remember that. So I'll tell you this fraud that was perpetuating, and it was a very interesting exercise that these guys tried to rope me in on. I was just lucky that I didn't fall prey to it. So I just opened my, I'd gone and changed the credentials of my bank account in England when I was working there. And I was banking with this banking institution, which has a very unique, web page. So they already had double authentication, two-step authentication activated on all accounts across the country. And this was some time ago, right? About 10 years ago now. And immediately after I'd done that, I got an email from them asking me to log into the page again. Now, being anyway curious, I went and checked the URL of where this email was coming from. I swear it was the exact same page, exact logo, exact layout. You couldn't have told any difference between the two. And the only difference was one letter, because they didn't have that domain name. It was a TZ domain name, and I knew that they didn't have a TZ domain name. Lucky. Otherwise, entering it would have meant that all my money would have been siphoned off. So one has to be very careful. There has to be exercises that we used to carry out across the organization, that some of us implemented through the IT department, because they are the nodal officers in this context, and to educate people on what to see when there's an email that comes up, right? And in case of, for example, if you do get caught up in something of this nature, what is it that you do? You immediately report it to IT, who's going to siphon off that particular thing. And then there are various forms that the digital crimes have taken to today. There's cyber spoofing. There's cyber attacks in the forms of ransomware, which have become supremely prevalent. I remember 10 years ago when I was studying as well for my master's. It was unique because our books didn't contain case laws. So you're basically digging for information across the internet in order to hear hear it from sources that as to what is happening in the world. One very interesting case that I got to know through sources was this hacking community which had shut down buildings in Europe, and they've been doing it across the region, right? So a lot of countries were affected, because what they would do was unique. They would shut down buildings, they would shut down the electricity in the building, they would shut down communication networks in the building. So you're locked in completely, and they would obviously release any of it on you paying some sort of money to them, right? And 2 days ago, if I remember correctly, I think it was CWT. There's a huge travel company in the US, which is valued, I think it's about $1.6 billion or something of that nature, which had to end up paying $4.5 million nearly to let these cyber criminals give them a password, because what they'd done was they'd come and siphoned off a lot of their data and encrypted it, so they had no access to it. And that's how ransomware perpetuates. But then basic internet protocols that you can take place of, educating your staff, everyone, that they shouldn't be visiting certain websites. They're limited on that count. You create good firewalls. Keep your OS updated, which a lot of people don't, because we fall prey to getting things for free and pirated versions of them. What they don't realize is security patches are not going to be released, and you're going to be in trouble at some point. Sorry for that long-winded monologue, but that was a very good question.
No, thank you for that. In fact, I'm guilty of not updating my OS on my phone or my laptop. I'm one of those. So, okay, so my next question. yeah, today, right after this. So, one of my questions is, you spoke about your work in England. So how was your experience? What was your experience like practicing in England, in English courts? Could you tell us a little bit about that? And how is it different from like our courts?
Oh, very, very different. I mean, we're on the same lines, but because we are have been a British territory in the past, but very different in the sense that the court structure has evolved. It is more attuned to the people who are bringing suits to the court. So therefore, obviously, consumers, victims, etc., complainants, petitioners, plaintiffs do have a massive advantage. Not that the others don't. It's just that there's a lot more emphasis on getting justice quickly, right? So I was practicing a very different area of law when I was in England, which is personal injury law. So I would do big cases of people getting injured in the course of their work, and some complex cases. One of them was valued at $1 million and £1 million, sorry, and I remember, wondering how difficult is it going to be for me to prosecute it. But it is so wonderfully systematic because they had three tracks, right? So they have something called a fast track, which is actually very, very fast because the value is between £5,000 to £20,000. Between 20 and £40,000, it was like the normal track, and then they have a multi-track, which is anything in excess of like 25 to £40,000. So very systematic. You go file your claim, which is just a 3-page document, and prior to that you were exchanging emails and like replies and your contentions with maybe the insurance company or the opposite party, whoever the other side is, telling them this is your stance and that you would do whatever. As soon as you file your claim, statement of claim in the court immediately decides the next few steps. So it will determine 10 steps in the course of a phone hearing so that you don't waste time in going to court and filing and stuff like that. And immediately those steps are followed. So what you're meant to do is, first exchange your contentions with one another, like we do here. A statement of claim, a written statement of defense, and then stuff like that. Any reply that you want to give, everything is consolidated. It's not that every day you would file an IA and you have to respond to that. Then someone will file a continuation of delay and then you have to respond to that. So none of that nonsense. You just get down to it, get down to business. Then at the end of your contentious exercise of exchanging what your contentions are, you get down to filing your witness statements on the spot. Your first preliminary hearing is held so that costs can be decided, because England follows the principles of loser pays, essentially, to simplify. So if you lose the case, you're going to be paying not only for yourself, but for the other side as well. So it's massive. On top of that, you'll be given damages. So it's a huge cost implication. So I would have to tell my clients that, guys, I would really recommend not to litigate, because it is a good 500,000 to £1 million that you'd be losing at the end of this. Likely for you to be losing it. So extremely quick. And then, after this, once you've completed the 10-step exercise that they sort of devised for you, after exchanging witness statements, and then if you're saying your cost hearing is done with, which can be in person or on the phone also, then the best part is you get into court fixes a date, and if it's a crucial matter, they'll take it up 3 days in a row, and you'll have a decision at the end of it. So in this course of, like, say, 6 months, or at the most, if things stretch because someone is not adhering to certain timelines or something like that, and there are very strict protocols regarding that, you're done with the matter in about a year or two, unless you're wasting your time in the pre-litigation phase of trying to negotiate and etc. So you're in there, out as quickly as you can. And one of the most fascinating experiences was doing a criminal matter in the Royal Courts of Justice in the High Court in London. It was brilliant because it is extremely systematic. So it's really cool because you have this little glass chamber in which the criminals are produced. You appear before the court, so it's a massive bench, as you see. I mean, it's very similar to the High Court that we have here, but a lot larger, right? So you have separate boxes. You have a viewing box in the back. So lucky to be part of that particular hearing. So I was able to predict certain things which the other side was going to throw at us. So my senior and the barrister that I was briefing in the matter, who's appearing on my behalf, on the firm's behalf, just as we engaged senior counsels here, was quite happy, and we had a great time predicting and trying to figure out what is it that they're going to do. And then we had the sentencing at the end of 2 hours of having argued that matter. It was damn cool. I felt really bad because there were 15-year-olds who were involved in gang-related crimes who got convicted. But man, it was so quick and so impressive. So the system is in a developed country is considered to be developed primarily because they're quick to get to things, as opposed to us spending years and years and years in litigating over here. So that was the main difference, and that's why they tend to be about 100 steps ahead of us in many instances.
Okay, thank you for that. That's actually quite an insight of how English codes work. And I'm pretty sure all of us have romanticized the idea of those codes at some point because,
Oh
you know,
yes, completely.
it's so
Trust me, it's
similar.
every bit exciting as you would imagine it to be.
Yeah, yes. Okay, sir, you spoke a little bit about the training programs. Like, for example, training programs for staff of a big company in order for them to be smart when it comes to internet usage. So, can you share some light about what can they be and how often should they be? Are they necessary? What are your views on that?
So it has to be done on a regular basis, right? Most of us, whilst we use it, we're still not aware of a lot of things. Like I said, basic things of URL checks and stuff like that, or where the domain that's sending that email or the email address, no one has ideas about what to do or where to report it or things like that. So what we did was very interesting, and Microsoft when I was there was quite great because we as a team which did digital crimes would run programs in order to update people. So about the work that we're doing, about what's perpetuating in the environment to keep everyone updated so that they're aware subconsciously as well that oh damn, if someone tells you that there's this the case that has gone on, it'll immediately strike a chord with you when you read it at a later date, right? So that's the kind of message that we wanted to send by running those sessions. We also make those very interactive, so people were able to ask questions. We took practical examples of breaking down an email in one slide and pointing out to what could be the anomalies that arise, right? It could be, like I said in my previous response as well, it could be a one .tz like sort of email address, which is quite random because it's mostly .coms that are prevalent, right? Or a .co.uk, .co.in. And looking out for those nuances, looking out for spelling errors that a lot of people don't notice, and a lot of official emails will not have spelling errors because they're all spell checked, right? That's a great way to find out whether it's actually an authentic source or otherwise. Then checking who is it coming from. I mean, who's the person who's signing off at times, whether it's actually a legitimate phone number. I know that's a little bit in depth, but there were multiple red flags that I could show in the form of an email. So someday the exercise that you ought to all sort of think of looking at is just look at a simple email, right? And compare it to something that you received in a spam box, which is similar to that particular official email that you may have. Please don't click any, links that are there in that. Yeah, please don't, because that will create a lot of problems. It'll infiltrate your system and you will have no idea what's going on in the background. But yeah, do the exercise of comparing the two. You will realize that all these things will be substantially different from one from the other. So if I remember, there should be a slide that somebody would have put it up online for sure, which we used to use quite often, where discerning an email and the red flags that you would find in an email which is compromised. So look it up. It's a very interesting slide to look at, and you'll realize, wow, in a 3-line email there could be so many things that you could look at, whether it is the source that it's coming from, the spelling errors, the subject, and then the credentials, multiple things. It's a really fun exercise. It's just those 3-4 things that you need to look at and possibly discern for yourself that it's an authentic source that the email is being received from.
Yeah, and I think now that you're speaking of it, I think even for students, even for like children in like high school, there should be such programs where you tell them that if they get some email or some link, they should not click on it.
Yeah,
Okay.
if kids are learning how to log on to Facebook and Instagram and where they're in school, why not educate them about how to use it properly?
My 5-year-old niece, she plays on the iPad better than anyone I know. Like, she knows how to open it, she knows facial recognition, she knows things that even I don't know.
Yeah, but then see, they've been born into this world, not like us who didn't have equipment of this nature. So their thought process is much more evolved because of that reason. But good point that you made. Lovely point.
Thank you. Another question about botnet investigations. Could you please tell
Oh,
us what they are and
oh, crazy. No, very interesting subject. Huh? So, okay, how do I? Okay, let me define a bot for you guys. Uh, when you go onto some of these websites that you visit, has a chat box ever popped up saying that you want to speak to customer care service? Yeah,
all
a
the
lot of these, yeah, very customer oriented platforms will have this. So that's a bot. Okay, that's basically a set of code that has been written for with certain demarcations. It's automated in itself, so it functions on its own, right? So what it'll do is, for example, okay, let's take an app which a lot of people would be using, Zomato, for example, right? When you make a complaint and you go into the chat box and complain, what it'll tell you is it this order? Then you click on that order, and it'll ask you for populated answers that it's telling you, and then eventually it'll tell you, describe whatever it is that your issue is, and submit a photograph. Let's take that. Okay, so that predominantly is a bot dominant, like sort of architecture in within that particular application. So imagine that. So the botnet is a network of malicious code which is infused into computers, and that set of computers has become one network. Okay, so what happens in those instances is the computing power of one computer is obviously lesser than 100 computers, right? Imagine what you could do with, like, it's like this. If you wanted to win a race, right, and you had the option of one horse or 100 horses, you would pick 100 horses because you'd get to the finish line much faster, right? So similarly, what happens in the botnet sort of world is that this malicious code is sent to you in the form of, say, pop-ups. When you click on it, something will come up. It'll ask you to install it, or it'll tell you that unless and until you do something, then it won't go away, right? So it's why they tell you not to access those links, or be aware of where what websites you're visiting, what you're downloading, and if you're security patches because of your OS not being updated, for example, or your apps or software not being updated, is that there will be code infusion that takes place in the background because you're surfing the net, yeah, and that will sit in the background of your computer, and it'll do multiple things of talking to various things and pulling out data, sending it back. So maybe it's in the form of cookies, because what cookies do is they actually store information and send it back. That's how big companies gather data. And then that bot is then used to mine data which may be very, very sensitive in nature, or it may be used in order to overwhelm another network. So, for example, whenever you hear of these little ransomware attacks that have taken place at big companies, which you would imagine would have a massive IT resource and a full-on IT department, latest equipment and things like that, but they still fall prey to it, is through these bots. So what they do is they go and overwhelm the system. They keep sending messages, because, like I told you, information travels in the form of data packets, which is unpacked on the other side, because that computer needs to understand what the other computer has said to it, right? So in order to do that, I have to open my Telegram to read what the hell is happening. But when that Telegram exercise has been programmed to read one at a time, but what it's been inundated with is to open 100 at one time, the software is completely confused, right? Because it's been programmed to act in a certain manner, and when that is overwhelmed, that bot overwhelms it to crash. So when that crashes, you get an entry into that particular network itself, and that's how they compromise it. So these botnets are actually most prevalently used across the world, by anonymous and things like that. Those hacking groups that you hear of were taking down and holding a lot of governments ransom, which go unreported. A lot of companies ransom, very few of them get reported. They're slowly coming to the fore and realizing that they have all got to band together. So a lot of big tech companies have now been, in the game of analyzing these botnets and the trend that it takes. sorry, I had to give a background in order for you to understand how the investigation also functions. So what they will do is to trace route on how this particular bot functions. So what they'll do is create a virtual environment, unpack this particular code, and try and understand where it goes and how it functions. Then it's like reverse engineering, right? Then you understand how that damn thing functions. Then following the route as to what it takes becomes much easier. Then you conceive where all it could have traveled, what it does. Just like we're dealing with corona right now, corona is something which is very, very, it's infecting people at a rapid rate, right? Which is why you're trying to trace as to who all have you encountered if you do encounter corona. Similarly, bots are also very, very similar. So the trace route investigation is also done, and of course it's far more complex. We can go into, it'll take a long time for me to explain the whole thing, but I'm hoping I set the lay of the land for how it's done. So there are multiple ones that are created on a daily basis and put out there. There is some very fascinating portion of the internet called the dark web, which is
Yes.
phenomenal, really scary, if I have to put it that way, and crazily, fascinating to understand as well. So a lot of that exercise perpetuates there, where a lot of malicious code is exchanged, a lot of data is exchanged freely. If you guys remember, there was accusations of how the Aadhaar system had been compromised and the data was being sold, if I can tell you that, for as low as 50 rupees. So it was insane. So a lot of things happen, and a lot of it is obtained through botnets, to put it simply. Many other things also, but it will take a long time to explain all of that.
Thank you for that, sir. Also, now that you're talking about cases, I want to ask you about the 65B affidavit. Anyone who has filed a case, which includes evidence which is electronic, has filed an affidavit. It is something we do regularly. It is something we do as a routine habit. So, so can you shed light on it? Because, like, what is the essence of the affidavit, and do you think it is actually successful in doing what it is meant to do when we file it?
Okay. For starters, I mean, kudos to for that to be existing in our procedural law, because it is very, very, very crucial. Even more crucial today because we're all embracing this tech term called digital transformation. We're all, constrained to do it in many instances. So it's very crucial. Unfortunately, people don't value it enough because we just file it on the basis of a two-pager, which is a procedural exercise saying that, the computer that I printed out this document from, or that it's conceived from, or the printer, or any of these digital resources are all functioning properly and things like that. But then the actual fact is, how many of us, even in law firms or in lawyer setups, are aware of the fact as to whether your printer is working, who's accessing it, where is that information going? Because obviously, when information is sent to a printer, it is through the internet, right? So it is going in the form of data packets. Very easy to steal. It's not very difficult. In most instances, we're also dealing with a lot of confidential paperwork, for that matter. Where is it going? Where does it reside? What is the resource that you've created on your server? Is there a separate, resource that you've created for your documentation, so that that's not compromised in any manner? There are only certain credential authentication exercises or people who have credentials to access that particular data. And is it password protected? Those are some of the things that you ought to do. So I found it really funny when some lawyers turned around and said that, why are you taking so much interest in a 65B affidavit? I felt that it was extremely crucial, because I said that tomorrow I don't want to leave any open ends for someone to tell me that my computer resource was compromised, and therefore that data can be questioned, my evidence can be questioned at the end of the day. And a lot of it can be spoofed. I'm not trying to be scare people or things like that, but just saying that this could be a possibility. So it is a very, very crucial this thing. Our resources are extremely crucial primarily because everything, resides in our phone, in our laptops today, in our other portable devices that we carry. Now we've expanded it exponentially, where there's smartwatches which are collecting data at some point. There's sort of, for these fitness trackers that we're using. We have smart TVs as well, which are connected. There are bots which are perpetuating on that, where they're stealing information from smart TVs, and there was a whole controversy behind that. So there are multiple things, but we also have to be really mindful. One exercise that I should tell you, and I should have covered it in the previous question, was that when you're making your passwords, make it complex. Use terms, use numbers, use special characters, use a combination, make it lengthy. So, because you have to understand, even when bots are being used, they use cryptography, right? Which is breaking of sequences, right? Which is what it is, and deciphering it, right? And in that, what happens is each number that you increase, or the number of characters that you increase, it makes it so it multiplies it by the millions, because the permutations and combinations become even more complex. So if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, it's just a very small number of attempts that it'll take for it to break it. And you have to understand the computer's computing power is just insane today, right? Because and there's something called quantum computing, which is going to blow everything out of the proportion, because that's taking the existing computing power and multiplying that into a million. And imagine that power being used in order to do any of these exercises. So tomorrow, if you have a 4-letter code, that's going to be broken in 3 seconds, right? So the more complex it is, there is a password generator tool. I'm forgetting where I'd seen it, but just Google it at some point and try and understand. What it'll tell you is how quickly can that password be broken into. It's a very, very interesting tool to sort of play with. So the longer you're
downloading this.
No, it's not downloading. It's a free tool available online.
I'm
I'm
using
forgetting
this
what the name is.
Yeah, because I know how easy it is to break into my passwords.
Yeah, there are multiple other resources that you can check in order to see if an email is authentic. You can also check, where all your password has been used, or if those resources have been compromised, then you know that you'll have to change your password on those resources. There's a website I'm completely forgetting, and probably share it with you. Can probably share it with the others
Yes.
at a later date. Yeah.
Definitely. We'll do that. We'll post it on the handle itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you mentioned something about dark web. Please explain it to me.
Okay. One of my favorites, actually. I wish I could have shown this slide on this, actually. I've shown it at the Google's headquarters in Washington 2 years ago. I've shown it in multiple places, including the Home Ministry, I think last year, if I remember correctly, or the year before. I'm failing to remember the timeline. But something that has fascinated me, and every time that anyone has looked at it has been fascinated. So you need to use something called the Tor or Onion browser in order to access it. There's a separate resource that you need to use. Then the fact that you have to remember is that the actual commercially available internet is like an iceberg. Okay, what is the principle of the iceberg? It's only the tip of the iceberg that is visible, right? Similarly, the commercially available internet is only about 4% of what the internet actually is. Internet actually has no demarcations, right? The other about, say, 20% odd is controlled by governments and other, confidential resources that are being used for it. And then you have this massive chunk, which is like the Mariana Trench of it all, where it is just a world in itself. When I say world is like an understatement, it's a universe in itself, right? Which is called the dark web. You enter that world and you can get anything from, organs to getting assassins. There are multiple trades for weapons and etc. that are going on. Drugs is as just a minimal sort of normal kind of entry kind of thing over there. A lot of child pornography, unfortunately, and some weird things that perpetuate there. but it's scary to a large extent. But one very interesting thing that cropped up in the course of our investigations, because we used to use the dark web to investigate a lot of things as well, because activities which perpetuate there, then they make it into the commercially viable environment, right? Because it's a massive community, you have to remember. So the resources that ply there, some of the bots or some of the trends that we get to see, we know for a fact will enter the commercially viable environment, or they've entered and we've not known about it. So that's a great resource for you to like sort of see what's happening there. So one of the really stark ones that were completely amusing was, so you have like these, it's a big Amazon, imagine, right? So someone went and ordered ICBM missiles and it got delivered, and we know that for a fact, with a tracking sort of scenario. So it was completely fascinating to see that someone would order like a resource which is worth millions of dollars on the internet, and it gets delivered to them. There, somebody ordered some F-16s also, from what I remember, and it got delivered as well, from what I hear. So a lot of these crazy activities that perpetuate there. It's called the dark web for a reason. I would advise most people not to experiment too much there, because there are some absolutely amazing criminals there. Amazing for the primary reason being that they're just at a tech level and capacity level, they're at a different level altogether. When the new age phrase of saying next level, that is what they're at. So you don't want to be messing with those people at any point. So so be careful when you're doing it. It's not scary, but you ought to be careful. That's all that I'm trying to say.
The
Explore it
dark
because
web
it's a very
itself is
entertaining
legal.
thing.
The dark web itself is not illegal, you're saying. The activities on the dark web are illegal.
See, no portion of the internet is illegal per se, because where is the government regulating it? We don't have an internet law per se, right? We only have policies that have been framed which say that you can do certain things and can't do certain things. So that has been the whole conundrum from the beginning, has been whether the internet ought to be governed or not. Most people claim that it shouldn't be, and some amount of freedom has to perpetuate there, but then of course there has to be limits to that as well. So the ball, I mean, when I wrote my paper 10 years ago about open source software and how we should embrace it, which is when software can be disseminated in a manner which is free, um, I'd argued this as well, that the internet is not a resource that should be available to everyone. It cannot be siphoned off, and there can't be boundaries and borders that are created. So tomorrow, imagine like a China kind of a situation where you can't even break through that firewall. You don't know what the hell is going on in China. You have no idea what percolates there. The internet is completely different. It's completely cordoned off, uh, and you'll have scenarios like that, and you can't. I mean, just takes away from the whole freedom and access aspect. So there has to be limitations. But a very interesting question. Thank you for asking that, because most people wouldn't look at it that way. There are no demarcations. That's the limited sort of answer to that. But that's the thought process behind it.
Okay. So there's one question that's come in the comments. It's
Yeah, sure, please.
Mickey's.
Bring it.
Yeah, he says, are spams considered internet crime? If so, does India pursue spammers aggressively?
Spam is a crime technically, because it depends on whether they're inundating you and they are creating false information to a large extent, right? Now, spam can be legitimate as well, where you were receiving and you signed up for newsletters, and whether nowadays it's becoming even more nuanced, right? Because since privacy has come into the picture, we are going to be looking at it very differently. All of these acts, right, that we've talked about today, primarily because the form of consent has changed drastically. So it has become express consent. So unless and until you expressly give consent to someone, they cannot be in any which way either inundating you with information, using your information, because that's how they'll get you on the internet, or they cannot be taking that information from you either, right? So spam is something technically which could be categorized as something that is an activity that is, you know, questionable. But there are, you know, legitimate ways of doing it as well, which people do in the form of advertising, which is really irritating to a large extent, but it is commercially viable and acceptable as well. And as far as the second portion
We
of that
have.
question, yeah,
Huh.
sorry,
No, you
second
complete. We have 5 minutes of this session, so we'll just take like one or two more questions.
sorted. Quickly answering that, yes, there are instances where it's pursued, provided the circumstances are that it's grave in nature, where people pursue it because there's some activity that perpetuates through that spam. But in most instances, you would just use a spam filter and filter it out, right? So, so yes, it completely depends on the circumstance and what is happening or has happened.
Okay, another question is regarding cryptocurrency and the legality of cryptocurrency, especially in view of Supreme Court's dismissal of the RBI circular. I was waiting for a question on cryptocurrency. I was wondering why it hasn't come till now.
Yes, you know, cryptocurrency, I think we should take it up as a different subject because it's just going to take too long to talk about
so
it.
too.
There are too many open ends to it. There are too many questionable. See, okay, let's get this. So we've had a traditional banking system for a long period of time. It's a conglomerate. It has existed for time immemorial because it's been there for thousands of years now, literally. If you're going to offset that, it's going to be a difficult exercise. Let me just say that and stop there. Because then from here, the topic and what we can talk about will flow into multiple things. And I don't think we have time for that at the moment. I'm really sorry. Lovely question.
I will catch Sir and make him do another session just on cryptocurrency. Don't worry.
Oh,
we will come back with it. So last question is that they would love to hear. This is by Naman Datta. He would love to hear your views on the current IPRS instilled norms for online performances.
Oh, hi, Naman. Thanks for asking that question, mate. Lovely to hear from you. So Naman's a musician and a fantastic musician at that. Old friend of mine. Buddy, let's take this offline, yeah, because it's still something which is sort of out there. So I will comment on it. We'll address this offline if you don't mind.
For anyone else who wants to ask Sir any questions, he's on Facebook. I'm going to tag him with this post. You can send him. He's on Facebook, he's on Instagram, he's on LinkedIn. So you can ask him, you can DM him, and you can send him personal messages. If you want, you can contact us. We'll get you in touch with Sir. No problem. Okay, thank you, Sir. Thank you so much for doing this amazing session. I loved it.
I really enjoyed it.
I have more questions that I'm going to ask you later. So. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Lovely session. Really enjoyed it. Have a lovely evening, everyone, and cheers.
Bye-bye.